like I said, my name's Levi. I'm a national of Virginia, and you can find me on Facebook, Levi Fishbone Charlton. I'll also give out my email for anybody that wants to have it. At any time throughout the presentation, if you would like to say something, raise a question, have a comment, anything like that, you can press *2 on your phone. Anybody that's online can also go to their avatar and raise their hand from the options menu that's going to be there on your avatar, where your initials will appear. So I basically was helped through this process by a group called People's Awareness Coalition. This presentation is basically set up for People's Awareness Coalition because I'm giving back to that community that helped me out. And basically it was started by L.B. Bork. The book The Red Amendment was then written, and that's really a very good compilation of information that can be found through lots of diligent research, but it's been put together already, and you can see a lot of the research that's there. It's not the only research that should be done, so there's plenty of other information out there beyond the book that is very important to understand. And there's, we can go into maybe some supplemental reading after the presentation. But tonight's presentation is going to basically center on the fundamentals and the basics of what is status correction, not so much how it's done, like looking at the nuts and bolts and everything of how it's done, but more over general thing of what exactly it is, what does it achieve, why is it important, that sort of thing. So like I said, the group that helped me through this process is called PAC. We call it PAC. It stands for People's Awareness Coalition. And that basically just means everyone in America with political and constitutional understanding helping each other, if you wanted to break it down. So that's essentially what it is. It's designed to be an educational tool. It's designed to be, something to administer this process and stuff. Some of the core philosophies of the people in the group that we sort of all share are, first off, information. Like I said, we want to basically be an educational tool because really it's very important to get a really good full picture of everything before you decide to just jump straight into something like changing your status, like relinquishing your citizenship. You wouldn't want to do something like that if you have a heavily dependent lifestyle on the government. Like if you really depend on your Social Security or maybe workers' compensation or Medicare or Medicaid or some other thing that's given to you by the government, that would be something that you would want to try and work yourself away from before you wanted to go ahead and jump right into doing the process. Obviously, in the meantime, you could do all sorts of research and be part of the community that we have already. But anyway, so the core philosophy I was just speaking about was information. It's our mission to get Americans up to speed on the current condition of the government in order to identify the problems and, more importantly, the remedy. So everybody talks about problems. Everyone gripes and complains about problems, but very few people come out and say, hey, I do have a solid answer for this problem. It's not the only answer, but it's a good, solid answer. And if you would like to know more, here we go. Another one of the core philosophies is nonviolence. It's our belief that wars and rebellions are the two most destructive diseases of society. So basically, we don't advocate for anybody to go out into the streets and to get in people's faces, to start altercations, to be confrontational, to yell things at cops, and to be general nuisance. And we don't advocate for anything like that. What we do is we just cram information in our heads and we share information amongst each other. We, have lots of conversations and, general lighthearted debates about different aspects of interpretation and things like that. And it's all very healthy and productive, usually. And, basically we help each other through this process known as expatriation. And that's an administrative process. So again, you don't have to really go. It's not something that's going to cause any sort of strife in your life. One of the other core philosophies is cooperation. So I've already sort of mentioned and alluded to that point a lot of times because I've talked about the community that we have and how we really do stay connected and we speak a lot and we work on projects together. So it's extremely important to stay connected with other PAC members and also to stay connected with your own peer group that's local to you, neighbors, friends, family, things like that. Help to plant the seeds of what we are talking about tonight on this call in the community at large, and hopefully get some other good people that you can throw some ideas around that are going to be thinking on your same wavelength. It's been said in the past that once you read TRA, it's really hard to have a conversation with someone that hasn't. And that basically just means that once you understand the way that the 14th Amendment operates, and you understand that that is the fulcrum of a lot of the issues that we have, everything makes a lot of sense to you in another way that a lot of others are not there yet because they just haven't had that aha moment that comes when you do this kind of research. So the last of the core philosophies is purpose. Again, we've mentioned this in previously, but the purpose is to identify and correct the fundamental problem plaguing America for the last century and a half, and in order to restore the Republican governmental system as prescribed by the Constitution. So we're not an abolitionist group, we're not an anarchist group or anything like that, and we're basically for limited government and for bringing states' rights back. So a little bit more into the introduction before we really jump into things. I want you to keep some hypotheticals in your mind as we go through things. Why does it seem like they just make up the rules as they go? That would be they with the air quotes, the hierarchy enslaving you. Why does it seem like they just make up the rules as they go? Why are so many people actually afraid of the government? I think that question is probably answered by the previous question because, it's pretty scary to have a hierarchy that seems to just make up the rules as they go, right? Yes, hello, John. We got some chat going on in the chat box here. Back to the hypotheticals, how many of you would like to feel more secure? I think that's an easy question to answer. And how many would like to better understand why things are the way they are? I feel that it's important to understand a complex and troubling subject in order to be able to change it. You have to really fully understand it. You have to get to the root of the problem, and then you can start to affect a lasting change and not just a Band-Aid, because knowledge is power. It's our goal to help to answer questions, but also it's our goal to help you to have the tools to answer the questions for yourself, because that's much more important to say teach a man to fish rather than giving a man a fish. So now let's go ahead and begin into the presentation now. I always like to point out the fact that it's really important to understand terms, to actually really read the dictionary. When you're reading a law, when you really want to fully understand something, it's really good to go to a legal dictionary from the time that the law was written and read the definitions that are there. Because we know that when we are speaking, that we know what we intend to say to our friends and family, and they often catch our drift. But when it comes to reading and understanding the law, terms and word usage is just different sometimes. Some of the terms that we're going to go over tonight that really are essential in understanding the overall picture that we're going to be looking at tonight. Some of those terms are status, citizen, power, okay? And then we're going to look at the contrast between rights and privileges. liberty and freedom, and legal versus lawful. And what do those terms mean, and how are they different? So let's go on to the first one. The first and most important one is status. And status has many definitions, but the one that we are concerned with tonight is the condition of a person or thing in the eyes of the law. That is what the process that we provide, that is what it aims to change, is your status. Some examples of status, and also examples of how that they can change, and they often do change throughout life, is child or parent. That's a status example. Married or unmarried, servant or master, living or dead, and lastly, citizenship status. You can change your citizenship status. A lot of people do this. You can do it voluntarily, and that's most of the time how it's done. Also, you could do it involuntarily by, say, joining a foreign army or becoming an enemy combatant or something like that, which would be very bad. And you'd put yourself in a horrible situation in life by doing that. That's not how we want things to go. So we're just pointing out that this can change in a number of ways. And we help people to do it the safe way. So we change citizenship status. We change your allegiance. So a little bit about what is a citizen. Let's look at that as a term now. So citizen also probably has many definitions, but the one that we are concerned with tonight is this one: a person who owes allegiance to a government and is protected by it. That's from Merriam-Webster Dictionary. So basically, a citizen is basically somebody that's part of a larger group. They owe allegiance to a group. I shouldn't say a higher group, but they just owe allegiance to a group. They're protected by it, and then they would have the opportunity
has joined.
Hello, welcome to the call. We're only at the very beginning, so you haven't missed very much. We're talking right now about what is exactly a citizen, and I was just getting into the definition, which is basically a citizen is a person that owes allegiance to a government. So allegiance, that's the important thing to remember, allegiance. So keep that in your mind as we go on, and that will become important later, allegiance. So government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This is a quote you probably heard. It's from Abraham Lincoln at the Gettysburg Address. I bring this quote up because it brings me to my next point. And my next point is that I believe that the citizen bears some responsibility for the actions of the government, because after all, they are what constitutes the government. And by their contributions and acquiescence, by them just giving in to what the direction of the herd, they empower the systems that form. By taking this principle into account, we've determined that invoking the inherent right to remove oneself from an objectionable system is the single most effective way of disempowering it. So we aim to bring the power back into the states, okay? So we aim to actually diminish the power of the central federal government to a degree. Not completely, but to a degree. So we aim to do that. We have found a mechanism that will achieve that. That is status correction. So we will sort of go on a little bit more into the presentation, and we'll see a little bit more clearly how all this stuff fits together. So I mentioned allegiance. Okay, so a citizen owes allegiance to a government. So governments, this is how governments acquire power. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about power. Power, in the sense in which we use the term, means legal or official authority, right, or capacity, and possession of control, authority, and influence over others. So essentially, let's give an example here. A parent should have power over the child, not the child having power over the parent. That is a very super simple example of a power dynamic that would be considered lawful. That would be considered a natural sort of something that's following the order of nature. And also it aligns with common law in the fact that one of the most common maxims of common law, one of the most well-known, I should say, maxims of common law is that the creation can never be more powerful than the creator. Okay, so in this power dynamic, the child is obviously the creation, and is not is as long as the child is a minor, is never more powerful than the parent in terms of legal rights and responsibilities and so on. So a little bit more about power now, and we're in more specifically legitimate power. As I mentioned before, when we were going over citizen, and that a citizen basically is somebody that owes allegiance to a government, that's where the government's power comes from. That's where the government's legitimate power comes from, is from that person having voluntarily consented to adding their allegiance to that government. Because governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed. That is taken from the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so simply put, legitimate power comes from consent. So if you no longer really consent with a government because maybe they're doing immoral things, or let's just leave it at that. Maybe they're just bad, you know, and you just don't want to be part of that anymore. Well, you can decide, okay, I don't consent to this anymore. So then are you magically out of that governmental system just because you said that? No, that's not how it goes. That's why we're here, because we're going to help to actually fulfill the entire process in good faith and actually complete things in the right way. So a little bit back on track here now. So legitimate power comes from consent. Okay. Now let's take a look at what is the order of nature. The order of nature was mentioned a little bit ago when we were talking about the parent and the child. That's an example of something that follows the order of nature. It's a lawful power dynamic between the two individuals there. And so that's, again, an example of how power sort of orders itself. Okay, that the law regards the order of nature, that the order of nature is defined as the physical universe considered as an orderly system subject to natural laws. Okay, so that all kind of maybe sounds a little jumbled, but what we're getting at is that the law, in a lot of times, is based on the most common sense sort of things. When you're talking about common law, we're not talking about all these rules, statutes, codes, regulations, and so on and so on. We're talking about just the basic core essence of what the law is supposed to represent. It's supposed to follow the order of nature. That's the point. So the best example that the most applicable example for our purpose tonight is going to be the American example over the United States example. Before the Constitution was written, though, in common law, ancient civilizations considered the following to be the true order of nature. Okay, and that would be that God's at the highest rung of power, and then God cedes some inalienable rights or unalienable rights to individuals, endows his creation, so to speak, with certain unalienable rights. And then those individuals, through their own free association, they voluntarily get together to form groups based on their own mutual protection and benefit. And it's a voluntary relationship. Most of the time, this is going to just kind of happen because of where you're born geographically, your race, and your community. You sort of will just fall into a certain group. And but you can leave if you want to. Once you have an understanding of what's going on, and if you have, if you're thinking critically and you can think outside of your herd and not just kind of go along with everything that those around you are doing, you may come to the realization that you don't agree with maybe one or more aspects of what this group is doing. You can decide to leave. So this is the order of nature as it applies to government. So you have God, then going down to individuals, the power going down to individuals, then down into states, or groups rather, synonymous with states. And in the American example, then the states unionized. They all got together for their own mutual benefit and protection and gains. And they formed what's known as the United States government, the federal government of the United States, right? The Federation. That would certainly be the least powerful increment in this order, right? And this system is known as individualism. That's where the happiness and of the individual are considered more important than the collective. And you, again, are free to leave if you just don't agree with something. So all these concepts that we're getting through tonight so far add up to your rights, where they come from, and how they're protected. Okay, so basically your rights come from God. How do you protect your rights? Well, you protect your rights most effectively by basically teaming up with other people that have the same interests as you. That's how you form a political body of people. And you have a bigger voice when there's a million of you kind of shouting the same thing at once instead of just one person shouting something, and then one person 10 feet away shouting a different thing, and one person, a few feet away shouting a different, as you could, sort of imagine the analogy of Facebook. Everybody's sort of having their own soapbox to stand on, and everyone's shouting about different things. Sometimes they, sort of coordinate and shout about the same thing, but that's usually most of the time influenced by the mass media, and that just kind of gets everybody to focus on something based on their agenda, not really any critical thought there by the individuals that are being taken for the ride. So again, these are where your rights essentially come from and how they're protected. So what exactly is going on, and where are we at right now? So we've sort of gone over a lot of things that a lot of people know. Okay, yeah, this is where my rights come from. Okay, I've heard all that before. What are we getting at here? Okay, well, let's look a little bit further into this. The Declaration of Independence says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So as we read this passage here, this very, very important and famous passage, we see the term unalienable, and I've mentioned this a few times already tonight. What does that exactly mean? Well, something that's unalienable is something that's impossible to take away or give up permanently, because it was given and it was bestowed upon you by God, and that means that nobody could take it from you. See, if my parents gave me something, then they could say, you know what, if I was bad later, they could say, you know what, you don't deserve to have that. We're going to take that until you start shaping up, right? So that's probably happened to all of us at some point. That would not be an unalienable right. Obviously, that's a privilege that you've been given. So what exactly did change? Well, your rights cannot be taken and they cannot be given up permanently, but you can decide not to value them. Basically, you give them up by just not paying attention to them. You give them up voluntarily, but they're always there waiting for you to wake up. So that reminds me of another maxim of common law that says, "The law may sleep but never dies." That's good. So basically, what we have here is a situation where there must have been some sort of magic that happened to get people to stop paying attention to their rights. There must have been some sort of deception or some sort of trick, right? But how did that exactly happen? So now that's where we talk about the specifics about the 14th. So first time a status called citizen of the United States. Prior to this, all individuals were members of their state. And if you remember back about maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago when I said that the creation can never be more powerful than the creator, that is a maxim of common law, and that holds true here. The 14th Amendment created, through its complex language, a status called citizen of the United States. Okay, so if we look at common law, we can see that this was actually a lawful function. This is something that happened lawfully because essentially people were given this status. They were given a gift of this creation from the United States federal government, and they never threw it away. They never gave it back. They never said, look, we don't want this thing. They took it, they used it, they used its privileges and immunities, they used all of its benefits and its burdens. Okay, they accept its benefits and they accept its burdens, because he who accepts a benefit ought to also bear the burden, which is another maxim of common law. So essentially what we have here is, in the 14th Amendment, we have a new legal system that's been created, but it has been created lawfully, and that's the way that it's been created lawfully is because people went along with it. That's basically all it is. It wasn't actually passed legally. It wasn't actually passed legally. It's only been followed by people, and so in that way has become lawful because of the people being tricked. They have not been fully aware of exactly what happened. So in the 14th Amendment, later on in the 14th Amendment, the phrase privileges goes up. It's different from rights, and it allows the government to change, suspend, or ignore these attributes at any time. So the privileges and immunities clause in the 14th Amendment, let's just find that just for fun. Just a second. We're going to look it up real quick. Okay, I think it's section 2. Maybe it's section 1. Here it is in section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Dual citizenship. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges of immunities of the United States or citizens of the United States. That's the death of the 10th Amendment right there. And privileges and immunities are not rights, nor shall any state deprive any life, liberty, law, jurisdiction, and the equal protection of the laws. There you go. The federal government is dictating to what's going to happen inside states. That's the death of the 10th Amendment right there. Okay, back to let me click back in. Okay, so what did we just read? My goodness. The 14th Amendment created a citizenship status. It created dual citizenship. It killed the 10th Amendment, and it replaced our rights with privileges and immunities. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so the privilege, let's look at exactly what is a privilege, just so we can hammer that point home a little bit further. A privilege is a particular benefit, advantage, or immunity enjoyed by a person or class of people that is not shared by others. It's a power of exemption against or beyond the law. It is not a right, but rather exempts one from the performance of a duty, obligation, or liability. And I took that from West's Encyclopedia of American Law. So there they are very candidly saying that privileges and immunities are not the same as rights. And the 14th Amendment, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't mention a right in one sentence, one word, one time. Never mentions rights. Never mentions rights. It mentions the public debt. Can't question it. Can't even ask about the Federal Reserve. They're never going to do anything about that if you're not a United States citizen. You've got dual citizenship. Didn't know if a lot of people, I mean, nobody that hasn't read the 14th Amendment probably even knows that. So basically what we have here, what's happened is that the amendment ignores the order of nature, also known as government de jure. Okay, that's the lawful governmental system, government de jure, and replaces it with man's law, known as government de facto. So we've just now kind of bridged into our next topic, and that would be, what is the difference between lawful or legal? Okay, so that's a really important example. For me, for a long time, I didn't fully understand the difference between lawful and legal. So I thought that it was maybe important to help others to just definitely make sure that they knew what the difference was. The 14th Amendment is a really great example of a situation where the system goes from being lawful to legal through a legal process. See, before everything happened, everybody just was members of their state. They were citizens of their state. They had the nationality of their state because that's where they were born. And that's who they share their, those folks that were also born in that state, they share that heritage. And that was replaced. That was given, well, everyone was given the different status. And that was not done by consent, really. But once you reach the age of 18, it sort of shifts into consent. It becomes consenting by you passing that mile marker in your mind and then continuing to use that, the benefits and the burdens. By continuing on with that, that shifts into consent. That shifts into being a lawful system then. But again, it was not done legally. The law wasn't, okay? The 14th Amendment basically subverted the old order, the natural order, the order of nature, and replaced it with man's law, basically by force. And then we have now a de facto system. So let's look a little bit about specifically the difference between lawful and legal. Lawful is something that's in accordance with the law of the land, such as a birthright, parents and children, the power dynamic there. Okay, so lawful is according to the law, permitted, sanctioned, or justified by law, and it also implies something conformable to or enjoyed by law. So again, we have a de jure system, also meaning by right or of right, conforms to natural law. What's legal? Legal means something that's pertaining to the understanding, the administration, the science and the practice of law, implied or imputed by law and opposed to actual. So basically, is the robotic following of the words that are written on the page. It's a de facto system, meaning of fact. It's man's law over God's law, over natural law. So legal looks more to the letter of the law, and lawful looks more to the spirit of the law. Legal is more appropriate for conformity to positive rules of law, and lawful for accord with ethical principle. Legal imports rather that the forms of law are observed, that the proceeding is correct in method, and that the rules prescribed have been obeyed. So legal means this is the ritual, this is how it's supposed to happen, this is when you say that, that is when you do this here, very specific rules and charters that need to be followed just so, and all the right words said at the right time. Whereas lawful is just basically looking for that the right is actual in substance and the moral quality is secure. Okay, ethical principle again. So this is the difference between legal and lawful. And so just to recap a little bit, the United States system before the Civil War, before the Reconstruction Acts, everybody in the states were citizens of their state. They were not United States citizens. After the Reconstruction, basically that's when all that stuff was created. United States citizenship was created. It was just kind of given to everyone and superimposed on everyone. And those people that didn't relinquish it ended up consenting to it. Okay, and so by consent then, that sort of legitimizes what they do. So that answers in a roundabout way one of the first questions that I asked at the very beginning of the presentation. They just get to do why does it seem like they just make up the rules as they go? Well, the reason is because we're new order. Government is the creator. The federal government created citizenship status, okay, to itself. Then it gives some of that, gives some dictates down into the states, as we saw in the 14th Amendment when we read that. It says in the 14th Amendment, just to refresh your memory, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities, right? So what does that mean? That means that the federal government is dictating to states how they conduct themselves internationally, and that is, again, the death of the 10th Amendment right there. So this, okay, and so back to this, the new order. The new order is the federal government's at the top. They created citizenship status. They're the creator. They give power to the groups and states, or they give dictates down to the groups and states, and then the groups and states give dictates down to the individuals that are in those states, and that's about it. There's no God left in this system. There's no God. This is known as collectivism. That's where the group is always more considered more important than the happiness and the well-being of the individual. So basically, as we've found out through this presentation, political power comes from people that share the same status, and that's why it seems the states have no power. It's because all the people in all the states are United States citizens. They have no rights and no protection of the Constitution from the state wherein they reside, because they are not from that state. They're foreign. They are United States citizens. They are not citizens or members of their states, and their primary allegiance isn't to that state. So the state really has no reason to want to protect them, because it's like defending the goalpost for the other team or something, you know? So I know that that's pretty heavy and a lot to take in for anybody that hasn't heard it before, but I think most of the people that are on this call have heard it before. But how do we fix it? What's the best way to correct the current situation? Well, the best way to correct the current situation is to correct your status, and that would be to change your status to somebody that is a member of their state, to change your, get your state nationality back, your nationality to your state. That means pledging allegiance to a state, thereby bringing political power back to the states and bringing the federal government back into its intended function, all in one move. That all happens. So basically, we're here to provide the remedy, and we will help you go through this process. There's a lot of mailings that need to happen, administrative mail, registered, certified letters, things like that. There's a lot of different notices that need to be sent out, and there's a proper order of operations that has to happen. And basically, this is a long process, well, not too long, that essentially sets you up to have ample evidence to support your case in case you ever get confronted with maybe the IRS or somebody telling you that you have liabilities that you disagree with, liabilities of a citizen of the United States. And you can say, hey, guess what? I'm not liable for that. I'm not a citizen of the United States. And then you'll have all kinds of evidence to back it up, because that's what they're going to want to see the very first thing. So throughout this administrative process that our group can offer, that's basically what happens. You are acting in good faith, and you're turning in all the right paperwork, and you're completing your process of repatriation. So, or expatriation, or status correction. There's a lot of different ways to say it, okay? So basically, we're always just looking for good people to help move the vision forward, to get involved with different projects that we have going on, and help us to do some good research and gather some good information yourself from just being a part of our group and being involved with what we've got going on. So basically, we're all here to help, and you can start your educational journey. You could say, well, let me back up just for a second. I would say that we're basically on level 0 right now. That's the introductory level. That's where you're just sort of barely finding out about the ins and outs of what it means to correct your status, and how allegiance basically comes from groups of people that share the same status, and that you can change your status at any time by performing the proper procedures. You can do this, and it's lawful to do, and it's a safe process. We've got people that have done it. I've done it. So essentially, you can start your educational journey. You can start level 1, which we call the self-study journey. That would basically be where you start to research, you start to read books like the Red Amendment, like tell to understand how the United States has been really a lot of ways, not complete, totally pure communism. Audio issues again, huh? That's not good. Let me close all these other windows I have. Maybe I've got something going on. I did notice that little thing come up there. Yes. Well, thank you for notifying me. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. We're at the end of the presentation now. So essentially, when you get into the level 1 section, like I said, we're in level 0 now. You're just finding out about all this stuff. When you get into level 1, that's when you do a bunch of self-study and research, and you kind of, have discussions with people in the group, and they can help you. They can give good leads, good real suggestions on reading and everything. And as you kind of get up to speed on everything, you can do the same thing for other people. And when you really get good grip on everything, on the exactly how this all happens, good idea to want to change your status to being because it brings power back away from the United States. Dramatically out of balance right now with power. Once you can start to set yourself up to be less dependent on that system, and essentially you're setting yourself up to leave the system and be able to benefit from it. He accepts it to server. So when you benefit, then you're going to have to do all the. So you don't want to do that. You want to get yourself to a point where you don't have to do that. I would probably that should be like level 3 or something like that. Getting choppy. Yeah, sorry. Well, we're at the end of the presentation now, so hopefully that doesn't. Let me hang on. Hang on a second. Hello. I switched USB ports. I don't know. Maybe that helped. I don't know. Maybe it is your internet. I don't know. So we've got a guy in the chat. Danny's telling me that I'm breaking in and out, but it's a good thing I got through most of the presentation before that happened, right? Anyway, so even if you're not in a position to change your status from one reason or another, you can assist those that are. You can volunteer your time to assist with different projects, and you can know that you're contributing to a new, better future for all Americans. Basically, if you want to get involved, you can find us on Facebook. My name's Levi Fishbone Charlton. You can ask Frank Helderline, or you can find Arch Gabe, or you can find John of Connecticut, or you can find Danny Stuba. And any that will basically, you can get involved and they'll point you in the right direction of finding some good information. And you can also get a copy of the Red Amendment. You can look at Vattel's Law of Nations. You can look at the Communist Manifesto. You can look at the Anti-Federalist Papers. Read the Constitution. Read your state's Constitution. There's tons and tons of research that needs to be done. Tons and tons of talking and collaborating with people in the group too, because you can really skip over a lot of wandering around aimlessly in the woods by just talking to somebody that's already done that, essentially. So hopefully everybody heard what I had to say for the most part tonight. It looks like we had just a couple of people that had to leave early. If anybody has anything that they want to ask, you can press *2, or you can raise your hand by just highlighting over your name in the where you can see if you're going to be able to see. Okay, I see one hand up. I'll get to you in a second. I noticed that there's only 6 icons down at the bottom of the screen, but there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there's 10 people on the call or that have been on the call. So not everybody's going to show up on the main. You go to the top and you press on the chat icon. It'll open up a side menu. Yes, I see someone has their hand up. I'm going to get to that person. That's Jason, and I'll get to him in just a second. But then you can open up the chat menu by pressing on chat. Then you can look over to the right, and you'll see it says participants. And maybe if your icon's not on the screen, then you can just press in there, probably. Okay. So yeah, I don't know. That's something to ask about, I guess, huh? Anyway, hey Jason, how's it going?
Oh, just fine. How are you, Levi?
Pretty good.
I had a little bit of audio technical difficulties there a couple times, huh?
I think so. Did you hear that?
Yeah. You were
Okay.
breaking up.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes it happens. Well, I was just gonna just quick comments here. The Red Amendment has well over 600 footnotes in it, so it tells you where you can go to research the information that you're reading upon, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, it does. There's a lot of different little avenues and say rabbit holes that you can go down from that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And
yeah, there would probably be, a good for a really hardcore and diligent researcher, you could probably spend a year just going through all that stuff.
Oh yeah, easily, very easily.
Yeah.
And another thing,
and that's what I mean.
Too,
yeah. I'm not that. It would take me. It'd probably take me 5 years to go through all the different footnotes on that thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So what was your other point you were going to say?
This is quick. I can't remember. One of the guys said this in the group. I can't remember which one it was, but he said he asked this question: how many U.S. citizens died in the so-called Civil War? Absolutely none, because prior to the so-called Civil War, there were no U.S. citizens.
That's funny. That's a really good trick question.
Yes, it is.
That's great. Who said that?
I can't remember. I think it was. I can't remember if it was James or Alan. But what they should be asking is how many Ohioans, how many Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, Rhode Islanders, Texans, Pennsylvanians, died in
yeah.
the so-called.
Well, I think that the way that it's been asked, the way that you told it, actually is really great, because it's like a trick question and it really gets people to think, like, oh. That there was life before citizenship to the United States, like the world existed at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're maybe 8 or 9 generations in now.
Yes, we are.
It's not easy to see outside of that box.
You're right, it's not, and that's why they had to implement everything very slowly. They had to wait for those other generations of people to die off, because back then in the 1860s and 50s and stuff, the whole culture of America was totally different than what it is today.
I imagine so, that there are probably a lot of people like say the Hatfields and the McCoys, one was from Kentucky and one was from West Virginia or something like that. And they probably had a lot of, national pride for their nation. That would be their state.
Exactly.
And they probably were like, screw West Virginia, you bunch of dicks, It's
totally away from what we've been taught. We taught ever since we were little that, The United States is a country, which it is not. And the states are just part of the country. That's not true. The fact is, the states themselves are the nations. They are the countries. Most people don't know that.
Yeah. Right, because
States
the law sleeps but never dies.
Or a union of nations. Go ahead.
Say that again.
As I say, the United States it's a confederation or a union of nations of republics of countries. It's not a country itself.
Yeah.
And yet,
yes.
people have been programmed with Marxism to think that it is.
Here's something that's interesting too. Even every year, the president gets up in late January, and what do? They give a speech. It's called the State of the Union.
Exactly,
right?
The State of the Union. Shouldn't they be calling it the State of the Country address? No, they call it the State of the Union.
It's not the State of the Country address. No, it's a little hint that's hidden in everyday life, right under your nose.
There are all over the place. You just got to know where to look for them.
Yes. Yeah, and it's actually pretty fun once you put the glasses on and you have the State of the Nation, Mylene says. Yeah, but then once you put the filter glasses on and you can sort of see through everything, then it all looks very different once you've read and done this research.
Exactly.
Yep.
Americans have had the wool pull over their eyes for a long, long time. They don't realize it.
Yeah, it's true. And I've said in past presentations, that I can only imagine what was the psychological state of the nation, or of not the nation, of the Union, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people after the Civil War, they probably were just so ragged from all the fighting and just the constant unsureness of what was going to happen and how everything was going to be, and it lasted for years like that, and they probably were just really out of it, and maybe
they were
burned out.
They're totally burned out.
Yeah, and so then, right when that, when they were fully, burned out from it all, and they just want to have anything to do with a war between the states anymore. They just didn't want to have anything to do with that anymore. Then that's when the real evil started happening. Not that it wasn't evil. That probably, what was it? I think 5,000 people lost their lives in that war.
Over half a million, people died in the so-called. That's another thing. They call it the civil. That's another deception right there, because it really wasn't a civil war. It was a war between the states. It was basically an international war.
Right. That's why I try my hardest not to call it the Civil War. I only refer to it as that because that's what it's just been named, but it's really hard to catch it every time, because my indoctrination still is there. It's really hard for me not to fall into it.
We went to the same Marxist public education system,
Yeah.
In different areas, but still.
Right. Yeah. No, there's not much different about it. I've read a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America by Charlotte Thompson Iserby, and it talks a lot about the Department of Education, because this woman was working for the Department of Education for a really long time, I think under 5 presidents. And, she just really lays it all out, and it's a really chronological type of book. It's not really a story. It's it's very chronological, and it really is very revealing about how the educational system changed in those years, and how it came into operant conditioning and just kind of teaching people to be a cog in the system on a wheel, and just could sort of be part of the bigger machine and fall in line, instead of nurturing an individual's strengths and sort of helping them compensate for their weaknesses. They just want everyone to sort of fit a certain profile.
Exactly. Exactly. You're right.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. Does anybody else have any questions or comments that they want to bring up, press *2 on your phone, or you can raise your hand in the online interface. I see we got just wanted to make sure I got all the chats mentioned and stuff. And definitely thanks to everybody that showed up. I noticed a couple people come in and then go back out. That's going on. Hopefully, they'll come back on and hear the full presentation maybe next week. But I guess if that's about it and nobody has any more questions or comments, then I'll be probably talking to a lot of you this weekend, and we'll get back together here at the same time on Tuesday of next week. So if that's it, basically, I guess I'll just say good night to all of you guys, and I'll see you next week.
Your line has been disconnected by the moderator.